Well, I am more note dependent, and I have some totally different things to tell you about this. Jeff was a bit glib about what we know about this violin, and I have to tell you that though I've been working here since 1985, and my specialty is the accessioning or cataloging or recording of the artifacts or things we take in, that this was not recorded until this year. We have a lot of things here that were never recorded, and also a lot of things that we poorly recorded in the past because we become more sophisticated year by year. We're all volunteers, we're all learners. And so it was this year that I decided we have a lot of instruments that have been given to us because this is a musical community, that I was going to do a proper job of recording information about all the instruments we have. And this is one of the instruments that we had. All I had to go on, and at this point I want to give, I'm going to be like Jeff. I have some handouts, and I don't know how far they'll go around. I did these at home. But anyway, this is the information that I found with this violin, which had never been cataloged. There was no other record other than this. And this is what it looks like in its original form. And on the back side is a picture of a man and a woman. And you can see what it says, and all I want you to look at is the first sentence, which says, "This old violin, orchestra model, pepper case, was made," I don't know what pepper case means, made in 1900 by Roy Nellis Sr., Nellis Quarry. I immediately, because that's the way I operate, went to these genealogies and looked up Roy Nellis. And I found there was no Roy Nellis Sr. and Jr., and there was only one Roy Nellis, and it seemed unlikely to me, and you can see this from the date of this violin, that what I found in the, and now I have to turn to the Pedrick papers, what it said about Roy Nellis was that he was born in 1883 in Monroe, Wisconsin. And I thought it unlikely that he was making a violin when he was 18 years old. So I knew something that Margaret Gibson, who was very active in the society and wrote this, was not correct. So I started reading more, and I came to the fact that he had a father named Daniel G. Nellis. But then I read what, again, the Pedrick papers had to say, and Daniel G. Nellis, and I have to refer to my papers here that tell about Daniel G. Nellis, that the only clue that he might have been a violin maker was the fact that he enlisted. He was born, incidentally, in 1841 in Lyons, New York. And he enlisted in the band from Ripon with the 4th Wisconsin Volunteer Cavalry. So I had a clue that he might be a musician, but that's all I had a clue. And I think, Jeff, it was about this time that you happened to wander into where I was working on this violin, and you knew enough to look in the, is this an F-hole, is that right? You helped me look inside this F-hole and find in faint handwriting the fact that, and this is what it said, if I can find my notes. Anyway, maybe you can help me, Jeff, because I can't find my piece of paper that tells me. Anyway, that it was by Giuseppe Guarneri. In other words, he'd copied his pattern, and that it was made by D.G. Nellis 1900, which fit. So that was pretty exciting, and of course Jeff got very excited and immediately wanted to see if it would play. And of course it had broken strings and a bow that had hairs flying all over the place. And he very graciously offered to have it repaired for us, and I strictly told him minimum repairs, because artifacts, you don't put them in working order. And I got permission from the board to make it playable and have it played, because generally you don't use artifacts, things that are old, and of course there's the worry about damage to them. But the board supported the idea of getting it playable, and it became playable. And at this point, I needed to know something else, how come Daniel G. Nellis was listed, or whatever his name was, as a person who lived in Ripon, but Pedrick didn't say anything about his making violins. And at this point, we got one of our members, Lara Grant, she's on the board of this society, to do some genealogical research for us, because that's what she does. And she found, and this was very exciting, this is a tiny copy of it, in the 1900 U.S. survey, population survey, that in fact there was in Ripon, Wisconsin in 1900 a Daniel G. Nellis, and his occupation was violin maker. We had all that we needed to have to identify this correctly. At this point, and I think it was about at this point, Jeff said, can I get Dean Katahira, who's here today, to play it, because he's a better violinist than I am. And Dean came in, and for several months now, Dean has been coming in as he was able. He's a professor of chemistry at Ripon College, but he also plays in the college orchestra. And he practiced on it to get it, I guess, in tune and just for his own pleasure. And I am about to introduce him, but before I do, I have one more thing I have to do. The rest of what you all have a copy of talks about another person, Frank Rich, who played this instrument for dances and in a theater in Ripon. Well, with the help of George Miller, who's an archivist in our society, we found that Frank Rich, the theater where he played, was one I'd never heard of. It was at 233 Watson Street, and guess what that is today? It's the new part of Fat Bruce's. No evidence that it ever was a theater, but apparently it was, because it's listed in a directory as a theater in previous time. I don't know exactly when. But you have this copy, and you're welcome to read through it. I plan to read all the things, but I should read you a little bit more about Daniel Nellis before I turn the program over to Dean. He was born at Lyons, Wayne County, New York, in 1841. His father's family came to Kenosha in 1855 with their son Daniel. He enlisted in the band from the Ripon 4th Wisconsin Volunteer Cavalry on July 13th, 1861, and was discharged in October. He re-enlisted from Salem in 1861, June, and that can't be correct. Anyway, one of the things we know is that Pedrick isn't always accurate in his information, if you haven't discovered that yourselves. And he was discharged again for a disability. He married and lived in Berlin and then at Ripon for most of the rest of his life, and he's buried in our Woodlawn Cemetery. So I challenge you to go down there and find his tombstone, if there is one. I haven't done that yet. So I think that's enough information from me, and I'm very pleased to introduce Dean Katahira, who's going to play the violin for us.